King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the world in riches and in wisdom. The whole world wanted an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart. Every man would bring his annual tribute, items of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, and horses and mules. The writer of 1 Kings goes on to say that Solomon made silver as common as rocks in Jerusalem. The NIV version of 1 Kings 11:1 says, King Solomon, however, in case you haven't been made aware, we all have a propensity to stray away and be enticed by the things of the world. 1 Kings chapter 11 goes on to say that King Solomon, however, despite his success as king, he loved many foreign women from places that God had already instructed him and the rest of the Israelites not to marry. Nonetheless, Solomon was deeply attached to these women, and the Bible said that he loved them. Over his lifetime, he collected 700 wives and 300 side pieces. And just like God said would happen, they turned his heart away from God. His wives introduced him to other gods so that he was not completely devoted to Yahweh. Look at verses 9 through 11. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from Yahweh. He had commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods. But Solomon did not do what the Lord commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, since you have done this and did not keep my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. The truth of the matter is we all have a however in our lives, aka a Howie in our lives. And while Howie may come in various shapes and sizes, his only job is to derail us from worshiping Yahweh. Adam and Eve gave birth to the first Howie in Genesis chapter 3. And all consecutive Howies are birthed the same way. Listen, Howie is a product of discontentment and self-interest. He's only there to rob you of confidence. He's only there to restrict your freedom and to make you hide from God. He's only there to wreak havoc, not only in your life, but on your legacy. And the sad reality is that most people will only remember you for your Howie. Rather than your holiness. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, 16, 17. I said to myself, look, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, madness and folly. I learned that this too is pursuit of the wind. This too is hevel. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 2, 4 through 11. Now listen closely. He says, I increased my achievements. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted every kind of fruit in them. I constructed reservoirs of water for myself, from which to irrigate a grove of flourishing trees. I acquired male and female servants and had slaves who were born in my house. I also owned many herds of cattle and flock, more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I also amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasures of kings and provinces. I gathered male and female singers for myself, and many concubines, the delights of men. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. my wisdom also remained with me. All that my eyes desired, I did not deny them. I did not refuse myself any pleasure, for I took pleasure in all my struggles. This was my reward for all my struggles. When I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile and the pursuit of the wind. Hevel, there was nothing to be gained under the sun. We've been in a 4-week study in Ecclesiastes, and by now all of the low-hanging fruit from the tree has been plucked. Throughout the book, the teacher poses questions, makes observations, shifts between prose and poetry, autobiography, and straight up, in-your-face, Pentecostal preaching. And now, at the risk of adding another layer of complexity to a book that's already kind of hard to follow, I have my own observations about the observer who made the initial observations as rehearsed by the author who's quoting the king who's observing. Bruh. Did you notice in the passage we just read, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, how many times the teacher actually referred to himself? This is my observation now. As a matter of fact, throughout the book, he only uses collective language like our, us, we, them, they, a total of 41 times. And just to be clear, it was rarely in a positive light. He made comparisons with people and animals and fools and said it was better that they had not even been born. On the contrary, though, he uses individualistic language like me, myself, and I more than 245 times. What's the point? I'm glad you asked. A narrow, shallow, inward focus has a tendency to make the world look more grave than it actually is. Hevel, everything is hevel, but especially when you have a low view of others. Similarly, there are times that we are guilty of making personal decisions that do significant harm to our society in an effort to satisfy our own personal desires. We turn God's creation, watch this, into opportunities for personal advancement and self-gratification. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King calls this practice thing-ifying. He says you can't thing-ify something without also depersonalizing it. In other words, when we use someone only as a means to an end, we're simultaneously suppressing the image of God that they bear and reducing them to a thing. Last week, the state of Texas experienced arguably the worst winter storm in Texas history. However, utility giant ERCOT prioritized profits over people, and despite having knowledge for over a decade that their systems were totally vulnerable and unprepared for a real winter crisis, they chose to keep their salaries as their main priority, resulting in an estimated 4 million customers being without heat and electricity as temperatures around Texas plunged into single digits. While it could take months to get the final body count, according to the Associated Press at the time of this video, there were 80 deaths that occurred during the winter storm. Unfortunately, we can't always see how our selfish decisions and thing-ifying can have long-term consequences beyond ourselves. We don't see how our appetite for pornography only adds fuel to the child sex trafficking rings. We don't see how neglecting third graders funnels money to the industrial prison complex for the construction of more and more prisons. We don't see how embracing nationalism only undergirds the mistreatment of strangers increases hate crimes and police brutality. True story. I had 4 slices of pizza last night. Now, I normally stop eating around 9 o'clock to ensure that I have a good night's rest. And it was only 8:15, so I'm like, cool, I'm good. Except that I've forgotten that since I've become older now, it takes a lot longer to process or digest tomato sauce than it used to. I was awakened at 4 a.m. this morning with a burning sensation that went from my belly button to my throat. I had to get up to keep from throwing up. But that was my body's way of expressing disagreement over a decision that my eyes, my nose, and my mouth conspired to make. They made a decision for the whole body without consulting the rest of the members. Y'all ain't saying nothing. Listen, decisions that we think only affect us can end up affecting my mama, my daddy, my friends, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. You get the picture. All I'm saying is we have to live in view of other people. And knowing, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we are all caught in a network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Whether or not the teacher in Ecclesiastes is King Solomon, I'll let people with a lot of time on their hands keep debating that. I got stuff to do. But whoever this person is, he identifies himself as a son of David and a king in Jerusalem. Towards the end of his life, he realizes that he's been consumed with the wrong things, and concluded that wise and foolish people will ultimately suffer the same fate. So what gives? It was a waste of time, he says. But down the road, there would be another son of David. There would be another king in Jerusalem, one within the same bloodline of kings. And he would make it so that wise and foolish people wouldn't have to suffer the same fate. As a matter of fact, he would go on to earn the title King of Kings. In case you don't know who I'm talking about the begotten Son of God. I'm talking about the one who suffered and died for you and me. I'm talking about the one who was dead for 3 days and God resurrected him. I'm talking about the one who went away to prepare a place for everyone who believes in him. I'm talking about the one who's coming back real soon to take us up out of here. I'm talking about Jesus. I started collecting badges 21 years ago, and I would put them on, but I don't want y'all to see how big my head is. It may not fit. I guess I'll try it anyway. Let's see. Oh, my God. I started collecting badges as I stepped into ministry full time. And I've been blessed to travel many different places. They don't always get badges, but some places do. And when they do, I like to keep them. There's a story associated with each badge. When I used to hear the term collector, I immediately associated it with a nerdy, thick eyeglass wearing individual carrying a bag full of dead butterflies. But as I've gotten older, I see that that's not always the case, hence myself. In fact, you can pretty much collect anything looking the way you're looking. Like all those plastic HEB bags you got in your pantry. Or like Graham Barker in Australia, who collects belly button lint. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Absolute futility, everything is futile. In English, it's translated as teacher or preacher. But in the original Hebrew language, you can clearly see that yes, he's a teacher, but he's much more than a teacher. In Hebrews, it says he's a kohelet. A kohelet is a collector, and this particular collector happens to collect sentences and phrases and pieces of wisdom, and then he distributes them to a group of people. But in fact, that's not all he collects. He collected a plethora of experiences throughout his earthly sojourn, including sorrow, grief, pleasure, personal enjoyment, achievement, houses, vineyards, gardens, parks, fruit, reservoirs of water. He collected males and female servants, slaves, cattle, flocks, silver, gold, sopranos, altos, tenors, side pieces. Bruh. He said he lived it up and didn't deny himself any pleasure whatsoever. After all, he was the greatest kohelet king the world had ever seen. That is, until a greater kohelet and a greater king arrived on the scene. This particular kohelet came not to collect awards and degrees or accomplishments or accruements. He didn't come collecting wealth, wisdom, women, but he came collecting people for his Father. He collected people from the margins, and he collected those who have been thing-ified and those who have been tortured by Howie, those who have been criticized, those who have been disregarded, those who have been disappointed, those who have been thrown away. He came gathering orphans and widows, and he takes them as his collection and integrates them into a brand new family unit. And in the family that Jesus integrates us into, every member has a unique role and responsibility. And the result is we get to become more and more and more like the great King of Israel. A vaporous life is not a reason to live recklessly, but a reason to live more responsibly. A vaporous life should make us want to be more intentional and discriminate with respect to how we spend our time and our energy and how we invest our love. The new Son of David and King of Jerusalem modeled what it looked like to prioritize people over everything else. He came to serve and not just to be served. He came teaching us to pursue the only thing in the whole world that won't end in hevel. Hevel. Everything is hevel. And that thing is love. Prophetic words will cease. Teaching will end. Preaching will end. Wisdom will hit a brick wall. Wealth will dissipate. Wives and husbands will die. But love never fails.